Imagine discovering that everything you believed about your family was a lie. That the people you called your children were simply waiting for your death to divide your fortune. This is the true story of one of the most powerful businessmen on the American East Coast, a man who built an empire from nothing and decided to conduct the cruelest test a father can do, pretend he was dying to discover who truly loved him. What he discovered was so devastating that it changed his life forever. Stay until the end because this revelation will leave you speechless. The winter of 2023 arrived early in Boston, Massachusetts. Cold winds swept through the historic streets of Beacon Hill, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, where century-old mansions stood as monuments to old American wealth. Behind the wrought iron gates of No. 47 Lewisburg Square lived Robert Harrison Caldwell III, a man whose name commanded respect in corporate boardrooms from New York to San Francisco. At 68 years old, Robert was the living embodiment of the American dream. But his story didn't begin in mansions or board meetings. It began 46 years earlier, on a freezing March morning in 1977, when a 22-year-old Irish immigrant stepped off a plane at Logan International Airport with exactly $300 in his pocket, a worn suitcase, and a dream that seemed impossible. Robert had left behind the green hills of County Cork, Ireland, where opportunities were scarce and futures were predetermined by birth. His father had been a factory worker, his grandfather before him. But Robert refused to accept that destiny. He had studied engineering through borrowed books and candlelight in his family's small cottage, teaching himself advanced mathematics while his peers spent evenings at the local pub. Those first years in America were brutal. Robert worked as a janitor at Massachusetts General Hospital, mopping floors and cleaning operating rooms from midnight until 8 in the morning. Then he would rush to Northeastern University, where he had secured a partial scholarship, attending engineering classes while fighting to keep his eyes open. He survived on coffee, determination, and an unshakable belief that hard work would eventually pay off. But it wasn't just hard work that defined Robert. It was his ability to see opportunities where others saw only routine. While cleaning the cardiac monitoring unit at the hospital, he noticed doctors struggling with bulky, expensive equipment that kept patients tethered to their beds. Night after night, he observed their frustration. And night after night, an idea began forming in his mind. Using salvaged electronics from hospital surplus and equipment he bought with his meager savings, Robert spent 2 years developing a prototype in his tiny studio apartment in Dorchester. His neighbors complained about the soldering fumes. His landlord threatened eviction. But Robert persisted. In 1982, at the age of 27, he filed a patent for a portable cardiac monitoring device that was smaller, more accurate, and infinitely more practical than anything on the market. The device revolutionized cardiac care. Within 3 years, Robert's invention was being used in hospitals across the country. By age 35, he was a millionaire. By 40, he had built Caldwell Industries into a conglomerate valued at hundreds of millions, expanding into medical technology, real estate development, and strategic investments. By the time he turned 60, his personal fortune had exceeded $2.3 billion. But money, as Robert would learn, couldn't buy the thing he valued most, genuine love from his own children. Robert had married Catherine O'Brien in 1985, a brilliant nurse he had met during his janitor days at Massachusetts General. She had been the only person who saw past his humble circumstances to the ambitious dreamer beneath. Together, they built not just a fortune, but a family. 3 children, Marcus, born in 1981, Jessica in 1984, and Daniel in 1988. Catherine kept the family grounded during the years of explosive growth. While Robert built his empire, she ensured their children understood the value of hard work, charity, and humility. She volunteered at homeless shelters, brought the children to serve meals at soup kitchens, and insisted they work summer jobs despite the family's wealth. Marcus bussed tables at a local restaurant. Jessica worked at a bookstore. Daniel did landscaping. But everything changed when Catherine was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2017. The disease was aggressive, merciless. Robert spent millions on the best oncologists, experimental treatments, trips to specialized clinics in Europe and Asia. Nothing worked. Catherine died on a rainy October morning in 2018, leaving Robert hollow and broken. In the months following her death, Robert began noticing changes in his children. Subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. Marcus, who had joined Caldwell Industries as vice president, seemed more interested in positioning himself as heir apparent than in honoring his mother's memory. His visits to the mansion became brief, perfunctory. The conversations were always about business strategy, never about grief or family. Jessica, who had become director of marketing for the company, started making comments about updating the estate plan and maximizing tax advantages. She brought estate lawyers to family dinners, claiming she was just trying to help Dad organize things. Her concern felt rehearsed, transactional. Daniel, the youngest, had become a successful corporate attorney at a white-shoe Boston firm. He began sending Robert lengthy emails about trust structures, offshore accounts, and wealth preservation strategies. He spoke about Robert's assets as if they were already his to manage. The phone calls that used to last hours now lasted 2 minutes. The visits that used to be spontaneous now only happened when there were board meetings scheduled. The conversations that used to be about life, dreams, and memories now revolved exclusively around money, investments, and business decisions. Robert tried to dismiss his suspicions as paranoia born from grief. He told himself he was being unfair, that his children were simply trying to be practical and helpful. But then came the moment that shattered any remaining illusions. It was a cold Tuesday evening in November 2022. Robert had arrived home early from the office, something he rarely did. As he entered through the side entrance of the mansion, he heard voices coming from the library upstairs. Marcus and Jessica, talking. Robert started up the stairs, intending to greet them, when he heard his own name. "How much longer do you think the old man has?" Marcus's voice, casual, almost bored. Robert froze on the staircase. "Dad's 67, Jessica replied. "Could be 10 years, could be 20 if he's like Grandpa. But honestly, Marcus, I don't know if the company can wait that long. He's stuck in the past. We need to modernize." "The problem is he controls everything," Marcus said, frustration evident in his tone. "Every major decision needs his approval. We're vice presidents in name only." "What about the estate plan?" Jessica asked. "Has Daniel made any progress?" "He's working on it. Trying to convince Dad to set up an irrevocable trust while he's still, quote, of sound mind. That way we can start managing the assets now instead of waiting." "Smart. Because honestly, Dad's getting sentimental in his old age. Did you see he's talking about donating more to charity? We need to move before he gives it all away to some foundation in Mom's name." Robert stood frozen, his hand gripping the banister so tightly his knuckles turned white. He felt something inside him crack. Not his heart, he would later reflect, but his illusions. The illusions that his children loved him, that family meant something beyond balance sheets and inheritance plans. He quietly descended the stairs and left through the side door. That night, sitting alone in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink, Robert made a decision. He would conduct a test. Not a small test, not a simple gesture. A comprehensive, methodical, irrefutable test that would reveal his children's true character. If he was wrong, if his suspicions were unfounded, he would spend the rest of his life making amends and cherishing them. But if he was right, he needed to know. He needed to see clearly, without sentiment or self-deception, who his children really were. The plan took 3 weeks to develop and another 2 weeks to implement. Robert contacted his personal physician, Dr. Samuel Chen, whom he had known for 20 years. He hired a medical consulting firm that specialized in detailed health simulations for medical training. He brought in his most trusted attorney, Richard Morrison, who had drafted every major contract in Caldwell Industries history. He even hired a small team of actors who specialized in medical dramas. Together, they created an elaborate scenario. Robert would be diagnosed with a glioblastoma, an aggressive and inoperable brain tumor. The prognosis would be terminal, 6 months at most. There would be MRI scans, crafted by medical imaging specialists. There would be second opinions from prominent neurologists, all part of the orchestration. There would be detailed medical records, medication schedules, and a progressive decline in Robert's health. On January 15, 2023, Robert summoned his children to the mansion. It was a Sunday evening, unusual for a family gathering. When Marcus, Jessica, and Daniel arrived, they found their father sitting in the library, Dr. Chen standing beside him with a grave expression. "I need to tell you something," Robert began, his voice steady but somber. "I've been having headaches for months. Dizzy spells. Last week, I finally went for tests." He paused, letting the silence build. "They found a tumor. In my brain. Glioblastoma. It's inoperable." The room exploded in reactions. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus stood abruptly, shock written across his face. Daniel simply stared, processing the information. "How long?" Marcus finally asked. 6 months, Dr. Chen said quietly. "Perhaps a bit more with treatment, but the prognosis is not good. We can manage symptoms, keep him comfortable, but there's no cure." The tears came then. Jessica rushed to embrace her father. Daniel buried his face in his hands. Marcus stood rigid, struggling with visible emotion. To any observer, it would have seemed like a family devastated by tragic news. But Robert was watching carefully. He was looking past the tears to the eyes. Past the embraces to the body language. And in that moment, he saw something that confirmed his worst fears. Beneath the shock and grief, there was something else. Calculation. Assessment. The wheels already turning, planning for what came next. The following days confirmed his suspicions. Marcus immediately scheduled meetings with the company's board of directors, positioning himself to take over leadership, in case Dad becomes incapacitated. He spoke of ensuring continuity and protecting shareholder interests. Jessica hired a firm specializing in estate appraisals. She claimed it was to help Dad get his affairs in order, but Robert noticed her cataloging art pieces, jewelry, and collectibles with meticulous detail. She made lists, took photographs, researched auction values. Daniel arrived with a briefcase full of legal documents. Powers of attorney, healthcare directives, trust amendments. He urged his father to sign them quickly, while you're still clear-headed, Dad, before the tumor affects your cognition. Not one of them asked Robert about his fears. Not one asked what he needed emotionally. Not one suggested they simply spend time together, creating final memories. Every conversation circled back to assets, control, and transition planning. Meanwhile, there was one person whose behavior stood in stark contrast, Maria Santos, the family's housekeeper. Maria was 62 years old, a Filipino immigrant who had come to America 30 years earlier to escape poverty and provide for her children back home. She had worked for the Caldwell family for 25 years, since Marcus was 17 years old. Catherine had hired her, and the two women had become close friends over the years, sharing stories, recipes, and the unspoken understanding of women who had built lives through hard work and resilience. When Maria heard about Robert's diagnosis, she didn't ask about his will or his estate plan. She asked if he was scared. She asked if he was in pain. She held his hand and said she would pray for him every day. In the weeks that followed, as Robert played the role of a dying man, Maria's devotion became unmistakable. She prepared special meals designed to be gentle on his supposedly compromised digestive system. She researched brain tumors and glioblastoma treatments, printing articles and highlighting passages she thought might be helpful. She rearranged her schedule to be available whenever Robert needed assistance. On several nights, when Robert pretended to have particularly bad episodes, Maria stayed at the mansion in the guest room, checking on him every few hours. She never asked for overtime pay. She never complained about the extra work. When Robert tried to give her a bonus for her dedication, she refused, saying, "Mr. Robert, you and Miss Catherine gave me a life. This is not about money." The contrast became unbearable. Robert's biological children, who had been raised with every advantage, educated at the finest schools, given opportunities most people could only dream of, saw him as an asset to be managed. Maria, who had worked as their housekeeper, who had cleaned their rooms and washed their clothes, who had never received anything close to the privileges they enjoyed, saw him as a human being worthy of love and care. As the weeks turned into months, the evidence of his children's true nature accumulated like snowfall. Robert had installed discreet cameras throughout the mansion, recording every conversation. What he captured was damning. Marcus on the phone with a board member, "Look, Dad's cognitive decline is already noticeable. We need to be ready to move quickly on the succession plan. I've been grooming the executive team to report to me directly. Jessica meeting with an art appraiser in the mansion's gallery. I want detailed valuations on everything. And I mean everything. The moment Dad passes, I don't want any confusion about what belongs to whom." Daniel with a group of attorneys in Robert's own study, the key is getting him to sign before the tumor progresses. Once he's declared incompetent, any changes to the estate plan become legally vulnerable. We need to act now. But the most devastating moment came during a family dinner in late March. Robert had arranged for the household staff to have the evening off, except Maria, who insisted on staying to serve. As the family ate, Robert pretended to have a dizzy spell. He excused himself and went upstairs to his bedroom, leaving his children alone in the dining room. What they didn't know was that he stopped halfway up the stairs, standing in the shadows where he could hear their conversation. "He's getting worse faster than I expected," Jessica said, her voice low. "The doctor said the timeline can be unpredictable," Daniel replied. "We need to be prepared for any scenario." "Are we sure about the charity angle?" Marcus asked. "Dad's been talking about setting up a foundation in Mom's name. He mentioned dedicating most of the estate to it." "Over my dead body," Jessica said sharply. "Mom would have wanted us taken care of. That's what this money is for. Family. We need to convince him that we'll honor Mom's memory better by keeping the wealth in the family," Daniel said. "Frame it as stewardship. We'll do charitable work through the foundation, but maintain control of the principal." "What about Maria?" Jessica asked. "Has anyone noticed how much time Dad spends with her? He treats her more like family than he treats us." "She's the housekeeper," Marcus said dismissively. "Whatever sentimental nonsense Dad feels doesn't matter. She has no legal claim to anything." "Still," Daniel said carefully, "Dad's been talking about her a lot. Something about her loyalty and dedication. We should make sure there are no surprises in the will. I'll review everything again." "Maybe we should suggest that Dad let Maria go," Jessica said. "Gently, of course. Frame it as reducing his stress, limiting the number of people around during this difficult time." "That could backfire," Marcus warned. "Dad's unpredictable right now. The tumor, the medications. We need to keep things stable until everything's properly signed and secured." Robert had heard enough. He quietly went to his bedroom, closed the door, and sat in the darkness. Not crying. Not angry. Just hollow. His children, the three people he had devoted his life to nurturing and supporting, were discussing him like a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be managed. The test had been conclusive. Devastatingly, irrefutably conclusive. The next morning, Robert called Richard Morrison, his attorney. "Set up the meeting," he said simply. "It's time to end this." "Are you certain?" Richard asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Robert replied. 3 weeks later, on a warm April morning, Robert sent formal notices to Marcus, Jessica, and Daniel. The message was brief: mandatory attendance at Morrison and Associates law firm, 10 o'clock Monday morning, regarding estate matters. Failure to attend would result in forfeiture of inheritance rights. All three children arrived early, dressed in somber business attire. They were escorted to a large conference room where Richard Morrison waited, along with 2 other attorneys and a court stenographer. Video cameras were positioned around the room, recording from multiple angles. Robert arrived last, walking steadily into the room. No wheelchair. No trembling. No signs of illness. Marcus stood immediately. "Dad, should you be out of bed? Where's your nurse?" Robert smiled coldly. "Sit down, Marcus. All of you, sit down." Something in his tone made them obey. They took seats across from him, confusion and concern flickering across their faces. "I'm sure you're wondering why we're here," Robert began. "You're probably thinking this is about my will, about finalizing arrangements before I die." He paused, letting the tension build. "Here's the thing. I'm not dying." The silence was absolute. "What?" Jessica finally managed. "I'm not dying," Robert repeated calmly. "There is no brain tumor. There never was. The diagnosis was fabricated. The MRIs were created by medical imaging specialists. The doctors were consultants I hired. Every medication, every symptom, every episode of weakness was carefully orchestrated theater." Daniel's face drained of color. "You're lying. This is the tumor talking. You're confused." "Am I?" Robert gestured to Richard Morrison, who began distributing folders to each child. "These contain medical clearances from 3 independent physicians who examined me last week. Full cognitive assessments. Full brain scans. I'm in perfect health for a man my age. Better than perfect, actually. I'll probably outlive all of you." Marcus opened his folder with shaking hands, scanning the documents. "Why would you do this? This is sick, Dad. This is cruel. Cruel." Robert's voice hardened. "Let me show you what's cruel." Richard Morrison activated a large screen on the wall. Video footage began playing. Marcus on the phone discussing succession plans. Jessica with the art appraiser. Daniel with his attorneys plotting to secure powers of attorney. Their dinner conversation about blocking the charitable foundation. Their discussion about removing Maria from the household. The screen showed clip after clip, conversation after conversation, 3 months of accumulated evidence of their greed, their calculations, their complete lack of genuine concern for their supposedly dying father. "Turn it off," Jessica whispered. "Please, turn it off." But Robert let it play. Every damning word. Every callous statement. Every moment that revealed who they truly were. When the video finally ended, the silence in the room was suffocating. "You spied on us," Marcus said, his voice barely controlled. "You violated our privacy." "I tested you," Robert corrected. "I gave you an opportunity to show me who you really are. And you showed me. Not once in 3 months did any of you ask me about my fears, my pain, my emotional needs. Not once did you suggest we simply spend time together, create memories, say the things that needed to be said. Every conversation, every visit, every interaction was about money. About assets. About what you would get when I died. That's not fair," Daniel protested. "We were trying to be practical, to help you organize things." "Help me?" Robert's laugh was bitter. "You were vultures circling a corpse. A corpse that was still breathing and watching everything. What do you want from us?" Jessica asked, tears streaming down her face. "An apology? You'll have it. We're sorry. We lost perspective. We were scared of losing you and we handled it badly." "Save your tears," Robert said flatly. "I've seen your real face. All of you. And now I'm going to show you the consequences of your choices." Richard Morrison distributed 3 new documents, 1 to each sibling. "These are amendments to your father's estate plan, executed this morning and properly witnessed. Robert, would you like to explain?" Caldwell Industries is being sold, Robert announced. I've already received an offer of $2.1 billion from a consortium of investors. The sale will be finalized within 60 days. After taxes and transaction costs, the proceeds will be approximately $1.7 billion. He watched their faces process this information. Shock. Confusion. And then the beginning of understanding. Here's how that money will be distributed, Robert continued. Each of you will receive a trust fund of $5 million. That's less than 1% of the total fortune, but it's more than enough to live comfortably if you make wise choices. 5 million. Marcus exploded. Are you insane? We're your children. Yes, you are. And you'll receive exactly what you've earned through your behavior. The rest of the estate, approximately $1.6 billion, will be distributed as follows. Robert pulled out another document. Maria Santos will receive $50 million and the deed to the beach property in Newport. She's been more of a family to me in these past months than the three of you have been in years. She's earned it. The siblings stared in disbelief. The remaining $1.5 billion will go to the Catherine O'Brien Caldwell Foundation, established in your mother's name. The foundation will focus on cancer research, support for immigrant families, and educational scholarships for underprivileged students. Everything your mother cared about. Everything she tried to teach you to care about. You can't do this, Daniel said, his attorney instincts kicking in. We'll contest it. This is undue influence, diminished capacity. Try it, Robert said coolly. I have medical evaluations from 3 independent physicians certifying my complete mental competency. I have detailed documentation of every decision. I have witnesses, video evidence, and ironclad legal structures. Richard has spent the last month ensuring that these documents are absolutely unassailable. You'll spend millions on legal fees and lose every challenge. What about the company? Marcus demanded. I've worked there for 15 years. That's my career, my identity. The buyers will make their own decisions about personnel, Robert said. You'll have to prove your value to them like anyone else. No more riding on the Caldwell name. Jessica was crying openly now. Dad, please. We made mistakes. We were wrong. But we're still your children. Mom wouldn't want this. Your mother, Robert said, his voice breaking for the first time, spent her last months in agony while you three were more concerned about board meetings than bedside vigils. She asked for you. She wanted her children around her. And you were always too busy, always had something more important. I watched her heart break a little more each time you failed to show up. And when she died, you cried at her funeral and then immediately started planning how to divide what she left behind. He stood, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I built an empire from nothing. I came to this country with $300 and a dream. I worked as a janitor while you slept in your warm beds. I studied while you played. I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities one never had. And what did you do with those opportunities? You became exactly the kind of entitled, greedy people your mother and I hoped you'd never be. So that's it? Marcus asked bitterly. You're cutting us out of your life. No, Robert said quietly. I'm giving you a chance to find out who you are without my money defining you. $5 million is more than most people will ever have. It's enough to start over, to build something meaningful, to become people your mother would have been proud of. What you do with that chance is up to you. He gathered his documents. This meeting is concluded. Richard will provide you with all necessary paperwork. The trust funds will be established within 30 days. I've also arranged for career counseling services if you want them, and ongoing access to family therapy. But here's the condition for any future relationship with me: you prove, through your actions over years not months, that you've genuinely changed. That you've learned what really matters. That you've become people capable of loving someone without calculating what you'll gain from it. Robert walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. If I hear that any of you have treated Maria with anything less than respect, if you've harassed her or made her feel guilty about what she's receiving, your trust funds will be dissolved and donated to charity. She's under my protection. Remember that. He left the room, leaving his 3 children sitting in stunned silence. The aftermath was explosive. Within days, the story leaked to the Boston press. The headlines were brutal: Billionaire father exposes children's greed with fake diagnosis. Caldwell heirs disinherited after failing loyalty test. Boston patriarch leaves fortune to housekeeper after children prove unworthy. The national media picked up the story. Business networks analyzed the corporate implications. Ethics professors debated Robert's methods. Social media exploded with opinions. Some praised Robert's courage in exposing his children's true nature. Others condemned him for cruel manipulation. The Caldwell family became a cautionary tale discussed in estate planning seminars and family therapy sessions across the country. Marcus attempted to contest the will, hiring a team of attorneys and filing multiple legal challenges. Every single one was dismissed. The evidence of Robert's mental competency was overwhelming. The documentation was flawless. After 18 months and millions of dollars in legal fees, Marcus finally accepted defeat. Jessica tried to salvage her reputation by writing an op-ed in the Boston Globe, explaining her perspective and apologizing publicly. But the damage was done. Her consulting business collapsed as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. She eventually relocated to Seattle, attempting to start fresh where her name carried less baggage. Daniel was investigated by the Massachusetts Bar Association for potential ethical violations related to his attempts to manipulate his father's estate plan. While no formal charges were filed, the investigation alone was enough to tarnish his reputation. Several major clients terminated their relationships with his firm. He eventually left private practice and took a position as in-house counsel for a mid-sized corporation. Meanwhile, Robert sold the Beacon Hill mansion and purchased a 20-hectare farm in rural Maine, near the town of Camden. The property included a main house, a guest cottage, stables for horses, and views of the ocean. It was simple, peaceful, isolated. Everything he needed. Maria Santos moved into the guest cottage. At first, she protested, saying it was too much, that she didn't need such extravagance. But Robert insisted, and eventually she accepted. She decorated the cottage with photographs of her children and grandchildren in the Philippines, religious icons, and mementos from her 30 years in America. They developed a routine. Mornings, Robert would tend to the horses while Maria prepared breakfast. They'd eat together, talking about simple things: the weather, the garden, plans for the day. Afternoons, Robert worked on his memoirs while Maria read or video called her family. Evenings, they'd prepare dinner together and watch the sun set over the ocean. For the first time in decades, Robert felt at peace. He had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life, even after the massive charitable donations. He had meaningful work writing his memoirs and managing the Catherine O'Brien Caldwell Foundation. He had a beautiful property and good health. And he had Maria, whose companionship was uncomplicated by greed or calculation. "Do you miss them?" Maria asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Robert didn't need to ask who she meant. "I miss who I thought they were," he said slowly. "I missed the children I believed I had raised. But those children never really existed. They were illusions I created because I needed to believe I had built something more valuable than money." "They could change," Maria suggested gently. "People can learn." "Maybe," Robert conceded. "The door isn't closed forever. But they'll have to show me, not tell me. Actions over years, not apologies in the moment." 2 years after the revelation, Jessica was the first to reach out. Not asking for money or reconciliation. Just a letter, handwritten, acknowledging her failures and describing the work she was doing on herself. Therapy. Volunteer work. A job at a nonprofit where she earned $40,000 a year instead of the six-figure salary she was accustomed to. Robert didn't respond immediately. He saved the letter, along with others that followed over subsequent months. Each one showing incremental growth, increasing self-awareness, genuine efforts to become a better person. After 18 months of letters, he finally responded with an invitation. Jessica could visit the farm for a weekend. Not as his daughter being welcomed back into the fold, but as a person he was willing to get to know again. The visit was awkward at first. Too much history, too much pain. But slowly, they found ways to talk. About Catherine's memory. About Jessica's new life. About the mistakes that had been made on both sides. Robert didn't forgive everything in that weekend, but he began to see the possibility of eventual forgiveness. Marcus and Daniel haven't reached out yet. Robert doesn't know if they ever will. He's made peace with that possibility. On quiet evenings, sitting on his porch with Maria, Robert sometimes reflects on the dramatic test he conducted. Some people have called him cruel. Others have praised his courage. He doesn't entirely disagree with either assessment. "I destroyed my family to save my soul," he told Maria once. "I needed to know the truth, even if the truth destroyed everything." "And was it worth it?" she asked. Robert looked out over his land, breathed the clean Maine air, felt the peace that had eluded him for years. "Yes," he said finally. "Because the alternative was living a lie. Dying surrounded by people who loved my money but not me. Leaving my fortune to children who hadn't earned it and wouldn't value it. This way, at least I know. I know who I am, and I know who they are. And maybe, just maybe, they'll become the people Catherine always hoped they could be." He paused, then added softly, "And I found something I didn't expect. I found that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the person who stays when there's nothing left to gain. Sometimes it's the woman who held my hand when she thought I was dying, who prayed for me, who cared whether I was afraid. That's family. That's love. And it took losing everything to understand that." Maria reached over and squeezed his hand. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two people who had both traveled long distances to find unexpected family in each other. This story forces us to reflect on the true meaning of family and the corrosive power of money. Robert Caldwell had the courage to do what many don't, test the loyalty of those he loved most, even knowing the truth could destroy him. And you, what would you do if you were in Robert's position? Would you have the courage to conduct this test? Or in the children's place, would you be able to resist the temptation of inheritance? We want to know what you think about this story. Leave your honest opinion in the comments. Do you think Robert was justified in his actions? Were his methods too cruel? Or do you believe his children got exactly what they deserved? Share your thoughts because we genuinely want to hear your perspective on this complex situation. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. Your time and attention mean everything to us. If you enjoyed this content and want to see more true stories that will make you question everything about family relationships and money, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. We bring real cases every week that shock, move, and make you reflect. And there's more coming. In our next videos, we'll reveal other cases of wealthy families destroyed by greed, including the story of an heiress who discovered her own siblings tried to poison her to claim the inheritance, and the case of a tech billionaire who faked his own death to attend his own funeral. You won't want to miss these stories. Until next time.